Beirut, January 22, 1979. The city moves with the illusion of normal life. Verdun Street hums with car horns, vendors shout over the smell of coffee and spices, and children weave between parked cars, chasing a battered football. On the 8th floor of a concrete apartment block, a young Englishwoman sits on a narrow balcony with a canvas on her easel and two stray cats curled at her feet. To anyone glancing up, she looks like every other foreign eccentric who has drifted into this war-torn city. A quiet painter, skin pale against the Mediterranean sun, brush moving in small, thoughtful strokes. Directly beneath her window, squeezed to the curb, stands an unremarkable red Volkswagen. No one notices it. In Beirut, cars are left wherever their owners can find a slice of pavement, and the city is too busy with its own problems to wonder about one more rusted vehicle. But this car is not forgotten. It has been measured, checked, and parked at this exact angle for a reason. Its trunk holds 100 kilograms of carefully packed explosives, wired to a small transmitter that rests, almost weightless, in the pocket of the painter's loose cardigan. At 3:30 in the afternoon, a small convoy turns out of a side street a few blocks away. Two dark Chevrolets push through the traffic, cutting past taxis and battered Peugeots. In the back seat of one car sits a tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate suit, his thick hair combed back, his expression relaxed. He is on his way to his mother's birthday celebration. To most onlookers, he could be any wealthy Beirut businessman surrounded by bodyguards. In reality, he is the man Israel calls enemy number one, Ali Hassan Salame, the Red Prince, architect of the Munich Massacre, and symbol of the armed struggle against the Jewish state. From the balcony, the woman with the paintbrush watches the familiar convoy approach, her gaze hidden behind the easy movements of an artist at work. For weeks, she has mapped the rhythm of this street, the pattern of traffic, the exact second the Chevrolets are forced to slow near the intersection with Rue Madame Curie. She knows how long it takes for a driver to shift down a gear, how tightly the motorcade squeezes past the parked cars. She knows, because this is her single purpose in Beirut. Her name, at least to the neighbors, is Penelope. In reality, she is Erica Maria Chambers, an ad hoc operative of the Israeli intelligence service, the final link in a chain of planning that has stretched across years and continents. As the first Chevrolet draws level with the Volkswagen, time seems to thicken. A bus stalls a few meters away, forcing everything to slow by a heartbeat. A child drops his football and runs into the gutter. A woman steps off the curb, balancing a tray of bread. The painter's hand moves away from the canvas, fingers closing around the transmitter hidden beneath the table. Down on the street, Salame's driver glances in the side mirror, unaware that his passenger's long reprieve is almost over. Upstairs, Erica takes one last breath, her pulse steady, her mind narrowing to a single decision. If she hesitates, the convoy will turn the corner and vanish behind the buildings. If she acts, one of the most hunted men on earth will finally be within reach. She lifts her thumb, finds the small raised button by touch, and waits for the moment when the Chevrolets pass the red Volkswagen and there is no way back. To the crowds of West Beirut, Ali Hassan Salame was not just another fighter in fatigues, he was a phenomenon. Born into a respected Palestinian family, son of a prominent nationalist leader killed in the First Arab-Israeli War, he grew up with the story of loss woven into his childhood. By the late 1960s, he had turned that inherited grievance into power. Tall, handsome, and effortlessly charismatic, he moved with equal ease through refugee camps, smoky political meetings, and the glittering salons of Beirut's elite. To his followers in Fatah and the Palestine Liberation Organization, he was a symbol of resistance, the man who could sit beside Yasser Arafat one day and glide through nightclubs the next. They called him the Red Prince, a nickname that captured both his revolutionary credentials and his taste for expensive suits, fast cars, and beautiful women. To Israel, however, Salame was something very different. Intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv did not see the silk shirts or the nightclub lights, they saw Munich. In September 1972, during the Olympic Games, militants from the Black September organization stormed the apartments of the Israeli team. The world watched in horror as hostages were taken, negotiations dragged on, and a botched German rescue attempt ended in bloodshed on the tarmac of Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base. 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed. It was a trauma that etched itself into the national psyche, broadcast live into every household. Behind the gunmen and the chaos, Israeli intelligence traced a planner, Ali Hassan Salame, the man who had helped design and oversee the operation. In the months that followed, a quiet decision hardened in the offices of the Prime Minister and the heads of Mossad. Munich could not go unanswered. A list of names was drawn up. Operatives, logisticians, financiers, anyone believed to have had a hand in the massacre. The clandestine campaign that followed was given a cold, bureaucratic label, Wrath of God. Its purpose was simple and ruthless. Find those responsible wherever they were and eliminate them. One after another, suspected members of Black September died in hotel rooms, on quiet streets, in apartments where they thought they were safe. Yet one name remained uncrossed. Salame was different. He was not just a clandestine operative. He was protected by his proximity to Arafat, by his political importance, by the networks he controlled in Beirut. He surrounded himself with bodyguards, moved in convoys, and changed residences frequently. He trained, boxed, and lifted weights in gyms. He married Georgina Risk, a former Miss Universe, becoming a fixture of the gossip columns as much as the intelligence files. Photographs showed him smiling at social events, yet every image also served as a reminder of the blood on his hands. For Mossad, he was not merely an enemy commander, he was a living insult. Walking proof that someone could orchestrate the murder of Israeli citizens on live television and still raise a glass in the nightclubs of Beirut. Inside the Israeli intelligence community, his file was marked with the highest level of priority. Years of attempts to reach him had failed, sometimes narrowly, sometimes disastrously. He seemed to possess a sixth sense for danger, stepping away from planned ambushes, changing his route at the last minute, resurfacing with a smirk and photographs from yet another diplomatic reception. The longer he survived, the more his legend grew. Eliminating him was no longer just a matter of retaliation. It was a matter of credibility, a question of whether Israel could make good on its promise, that Munich would never be forgiven and never be forgotten. Within Israel's intelligence services, the file on Ali Hassan Salame grew thicker with every passing year. Planned ambushes dissolved when he suddenly chose a different restaurant. Explosives laid along a road were removed when a construction crew tore up the pavement. Every time the planners believed they had found a weakness, the Red Prince shifted his routine just enough to stay out of reach. Politically, the need to neutralize him only intensified. In the cabinet rooms of Jerusalem, ministers argued over the risks. Lebanon was a fragile mosaic of factions, militias, and foreign interests. A high-profile assassination in its capital could trigger diplomatic storms, draw unwanted attention from allies, and provoke harsh retaliation from enemies. Yet leaving Salame alive carried its own dangers. He maintained channels with European groups, oversaw security for Arafat, and served as a bridge between the PLO and sympathetic regimes. Every intelligence briefing about him carried an implicit question: if not now, when? Inside Mossad's operational branches, a difficult truth settled in. The methods that had worked against mid-level operatives would not work here. Salame was surrounded by bodyguards, monitored his own security, and rarely allowed strangers near him. Standard infiltration, posing as a journalist, a businessman, a diplomat, had already been tested and found wanting. Legendary agents were brought into the hunt, including Sylvia Raphael, whose years under deep cover had made her a symbol of professional skill. She and others tried to get close, to turn acquaintances into sources, to find the moment when the Red Prince would relax his guard. But Beirut was a city where news traveled quickly, where rumors of foreigners asking questions could reach the wrong ears by nightfall. Suspicions were raised, plans were shelved, and Salame stepped sideways out of danger. By the mid-1970s, the operation against him had become something more than a tactical mission. It was a test of institutional pride. Failure carried a weight that was both personal and national. Officers rotated in and out of the task force, bringing new ideas, proposing daring schemes, rejecting others as too risky or too messy. Some suggested a commando raid on his home or office, a swift strike that would leave no doubt about who had sent the message. Others argued for poison, a quieter solution that could be disguised as illness. Each option collided with the same problem: his layers of protection, his political visibility, and the crowded urban environment where innocent bystanders would almost certainly die. The list of those killed in earlier phases of Wrath of God grew, but one name remained stubbornly alive at the top. It was in this atmosphere, a mixture of frustration, determination, and political pressure, that planners began to consider approaches far outside their usual patterns. If professional operatives, hardened by years of field work, could not get close without sending ripples through Beirut's rumor networks, perhaps the answer lay in someone who did not fit the expected profile at all. Not a veteran agent with a reputation in the underground, but a woman whose very ordinariness could act as camouflage. Somewhere, they would need to find a person who could stand in plain sight on a Beirut balcony, befriend stray cats, smile at neighbors, and be dismissed as harmless. Someone whose life story would survive the closest inspection, because it was, in every official record, completely real. The more they studied his routines, the clearer it became that his downfall would not come from a commando raid, but from a quiet presence folded into his daily life. Someone who could move through Beirut without drawing attention and still stand close enough at the crucial second to end the hunt for the Red Prince. They would eventually find that person in a young English woman whose life, at first glance, looked as far from clandestine warfare as possible. Her real name was Erica Maria Chambers. She was born and raised in London. Her father, Marcus Chambers, was a man of speed and glamour, a racing driver and later a successful motorsport manager, descended from an old English line in which admirals and officers filled the family history. Her mother, Lona Negris, came from a wealthy Jewish family in Czechoslovakia. Almost all of Lona's relatives were murdered in Nazi concentration camps. She herself escaped to Britain during the war, carrying trauma that rarely turned into words but hovered over the household like a permanent shadow. Erica grew up in Holland Park, West London, in a world of comfort she shared with her older brother Nicholas. On paper, her path was ordinary. She went on to study geography at the University of Southampton. Professors remembered her as diligent, serious, but with a streak of recklessness. She drove a small red Mini Cooper and liked to push it hard through the city streets, taking corners harder than she should. Friends saw in her a taste for risk, a need to test limits, the same instinct that had carried her father around racing circuits. After university, Erica tried out different versions of herself. She traveled to Australia and then made her way to Jerusalem for further studies. She enrolled at the Hebrew University, a foreign student in a city still shaken by the Munich Olympics. 11 athletes killed on live television. Black September, suddenly a household name. Israelis felt the world had watched their citizens die and then moved on. In that climate, the security services were looking for recruits who could move beyond Israel's borders and slip into places traditional agents could not reach. Erica possessed a combination that made her stand out. Thanks to her mother, she spoke fluent German, a language valuable for operations on the continent. She did not look stereotypically Jewish, which in the eyes of Mossad was an operational advantage. Her file, as officers later put it, was clean. No political activism, no ties to extremist groups, nothing that would trigger suspicion when a passport was checked under fluorescent lights at a foreign airport. When she was shown documents detailing what had happened to her mother's family in the camps, it was not just another briefing. It reminded her that her London upbringing existed because others in her family had died. She agreed to work for Israeli intelligence. Years of preparation began, training in surveillance, in building and inhabiting legends, and in the disciplines that keep a cover identity intact. In 1975, she was sent to Germany to live as a sleeper agent, quietly constructing a mundane life. The posting served several purposes. It distanced her from Israel, making any future connection harder to trace, and it laid the groundwork for an operation in which German soil might plausibly be suspected. After those years, the next step appeared in her dossier: a visa from the Lebanese embassy in Bonn, a new address in Beirut, and a new name for the neighbors. Penelope, the shy Englishwoman who liked cats, painted cityscapes, and spoke softly about charity work for Palestinian children. In Beirut, she rented an apartment on Rue Verdun, close enough to see Salame's daily route from her balcony. To curious neighbors, she mentioned work with an aid organization, never more than a few gentle sentences, always delivered with the reserve of a foreigner learning to live in a city at war. By the summer of 1978, the long, faltering hunt for the Red Prince entered a decisive phase. Inside Mossad, the operation against him acquired a new code name, Burner, a sterile label for a lethal plan. The mission was overseen by Operations Chief Mike Harari. In Lebanese intelligence circles, a source began feeding in the missing pieces of the puzzle. When Salame left his home, when he visited his wife, where he stopped on his way, how his bodyguards behaved when they were bored and when they were tense. Cover teams were deployed into Beirut with orders to melt into the city. Their task was to track the Red Prince without him ever sensing a shadow. One operative checked into a hotel under an assumed identity, moving between Beirut and Damascus as if he were a businessman. His codename in later accounts would be Agent D. His assignment was to join the same gym that Salame frequented and quietly record every movement. His instructions were strict: no conversations, no eye contact, no curiosity that might stand out. He was to be background noise, nothing more. After months in the same room, it was Salame who broke the carefully maintained distance. One day he paused beside D's bench, corrected the angle of his arms, and offered a few casual words about technique. That moment of contact turned into short conversations, then regular encounters. Eventually, Salame suggested they train together. A cautious friendship began to form. In Israel, handlers reading D's reports were torn between alarm and opportunity. Any emotional connection to a target was dangerous, but refusing the contact outright could have raised suspicions. They allowed the relationship to continue, with each new meeting weighed against the risk. Over time, Salame invited his new acquaintance into his wider world. D met his wife, Georgina Rizk, the former Miss Universe. He saw the layout of their apartment and passed every detail back. He was drawn into dinners and parties, accepted as part of the entourage. While he smiled and accepted hospitality, he counted seconds and measured distances. Around 14 Israeli operatives were active in Beirut. They used Western passports and maintained separate cover stories. Among them was Erica Chambers, now firmly in her role as Penelope, the English painter on Rue Verdun. From her balcony, she could observe a portion of Salame's daily route, just one slice of a wider surveillance net that logged each movement he made. Patterns emerged. Nearly every afternoon, he visited Georgina at an apartment in the Snoober district of West Beirut. On quieter days, he might be found at the gym or the sauna. One plan proposed killing him in the steam-filled rooms of that sauna, but it was vetoed. The risk of mass casualties among uninvolved patrons was too high. Gradually, attention shifted to the streets themselves. Convoys had to slow at certain intersections. A parked car could become a weapon whose power was triggered from a distance. The planners settled on a car bomb. Explosives would be packed into the trunk of a Volkswagen parked along a route his convoy used almost every day. The angles of the buildings and the habits of his drivers were calculated. Agent D confirmed the route, checked the timing, and reported back. The trap was designed. What remained was to decide who would hold the transmitter, who would watch from a fixed point with a clear line of sight and the composure to press a button at exactly the right second, knowing that once they did, there would be no second attempt. On the morning of January 22, 1979, Beirut woke to another gray morning. For most residents, it was just another day in a city used to tension. The red Volkswagen, prepared in advance, had already been driven into place on Verdun Street and parked at a spot chosen after countless walkthroughs and timing runs. Its trunk housed 100 kilograms of explosives, wired for a directional blast. The car's presence was unremarkable. It blended into a line of vehicles pressed against the curb. From her balcony on Rue Verdun, Erica settled into her role as Penelope. She set out her brushes, positioned a canvas toward the street, and left the balcony door open. 2 cats appeared, and she fed them automatically. Out at sea, on the deck of an Israeli missile boat, Mike Harari watched the coastline through a telescope. Elsewhere in Beirut, other members of the team checked watches and rehearsed their exits. Shortly after 3:30, word came that Salame had left Georgina's apartment and his convoy was on the move. On Verdun Street, the traffic swelled and ebbed. A bus lurched to a stop, and a taxi driver argued with a passenger. In this ordinary disorder, the 2 Chevrolets carrying the Red Prince turned toward Erica's stretch of road. From above, she saw them emerge, dark shapes weaving through the sunlight. Her heart sped up, but her hands remained steady as she made small strokes on the canvas. The transmitter lay within reach, disguised under a cloth. The first Chevrolet drew level with the parked car and began to turn onto Rue Madame Curie, forced to slow at the exact point chosen in the plans. Erica's thumb found the raised button without looking. Down in the street, a pedestrian stepped off the curb carrying a tray of flatbread. A child chased a ball into the gutter. A bus stalled with a cough of smoke. She pressed. The explosion ripped through Verdun Street, shattering glass for blocks. The red Volkswagen disintegrated into a ball of fire and twisted metal. Shockwaves slammed into walls and storefronts. The Chevrolets absorbed the brunt of the blast. 4 of Salame's bodyguards died instantly. 4 civilians were also killed and 16 wounded. Within seconds, smoke and dust rolled over the scene. Screams rose over the stopped cars. Sirens began to wail as ambulances converged on the scene. Salame himself was dragged from the wreckage, grievously wounded. He was rushed to the American University Hospital of Beirut. For a brief moment, there was a chance he might survive. At 4:03 p.m., less than 30 minutes after the blast, he was declared dead. On the balcony above Verdun Street, the English painter gathered her brushes and paints. Neighbors assumed she was in shock. She spoke very little, saying only that she needed to rest. Within hours, as chaos reigned below, the rehearsed extraction began. Erica left the apartment she had so carefully curated, asked the neighbors to feed the cats while she took a short holiday, and disappeared into the flow of people leaving the city. Along with 2 other agents, she reached the coast near Jaunia, where a small boat ferried them to the waiting missile ship. By the time Beirut's militias and security services began to lock down the city, the woman who had pressed the button was already vanishing into the sea. News of the explosion spread through Beirut with the speed of rumor and fear. As names filtered out from the hospital and security offices, the scale of what had happened became clear. The Red Prince was dead. Within hours, Palestinian officials gathered at the American University Hospital. To them, it was the assassination of a national symbol. The funeral that followed shook the city. More than 100,000 people poured into the streets to accompany Ali Hassan Salame on his final journey. Men and women wept. Gunmen fired volleys into the air. For the crowds, this was a moment of collective mourning and defiance. At the center, Yasser Arafat himself helped carry the coffin. Cameras recorded his drawn face as he delivered a short cutting line. "We have lost a lion." He vowed that those responsible would be hunted down. Yet the people who had orchestrated the operation were no longer in the country. While the PLO and Lebanese security services scrambled to impose roadblocks and interrogate suspects, the Mossad team was already moving toward the coast, then out toward international waters. What remained in Beirut were only fragments: a burned shell of a car, shaken witnesses, and a modest apartment on Rue Verdun that suddenly drew attention. Neighbors on the street remembered the quiet Englishwoman who fed cats and painted city scenes. They recalled how, soon after the explosion, she had begun to pack. She had asked them to look after the cats and said she needed a short vacation to recover from the shock. No one had thought it strange at the time. Only later did they realize that Penelope had never returned. When investigators entered the apartment, they found canvases, clothes, ordinary furniture, On a table lay a British passport in the name of Erica Maria Chambers. For some, in the PLO and Lebanese press, the idea that this name represented a real person was hard to accept. It seemed too neat, too perfectly English. Rumors spread that Erica Chambers was a legend built by Mossad to mislead investigators. Another operative in the same network, who had traveled under the name Peter Scriver, was later revealed never to have existed, deepening the suspicion. Over time, independent researchers began to confirm that Erica was not a ghost. Israeli author Aaron J. Klein described her as a nice British lady who had used her own passport and had been recruited for a single mission. German Mossad expert Wilhelm Dietl traced her back to the United Kingdom and met her father. Their relationship, he learned, had been strained, but the older man admitted that from time to time he received Christmas cards with Israeli stamps. That detail suggested that his daughter was alive, sending the briefest possible signals that she still existed. According to Dietl, Erica maintained ties with her brother, Nicholas Mordaunt Chambers. His life had followed a different path: Oxford, a career in law, appointment as Queen's Counsel, and eventually a position as a civil court judge. When journalists finally linked him to the name on the passport in Beirut, they sought confirmation. When asked directly whether Erica Maria Chambers was his sister, Nicholas replied that the question was understandable but not something he could help with. Pressed further, he laughed and said only that the reporter was probably intrigued and that it was probably really best I don't say anything. On a later call, he added that he hoped time had moved on. The mystery remained. In the years that followed, the name Erica Chambers drifted into legend. For the neighbors on Rue Verdun, she remained a simple memory, the quiet Englishwoman with cats who vanished after the blast. For Palestinians, the focus stayed on the man she had helped kill. The Red Prince became, in death, even larger than he had been in life. Posters and speeches fixed him in the pantheon of martyrs. His assassination was held up as proof that nowhere was safe from Israel's intelligence services and that the cause he served demanded new leaders. In Israel, the operation was seen as the closing chapter of a story that had begun in Munich, proof that the state had a long memory, even as some quietly noted the civilian cost and political entanglement. Internationally, governments condemned the killing in public, while intelligence services quietly studied the combination of human penetration, long-term surveillance, and a single timed strike. For Erica herself, the consequences were intimate and impossible to measure from the outside. Recruited for one mission and then released, she had stepped into a geopolitical struggle and then slipped out again without the public ever seeing her face. Somewhere, according to rare hints from journalists, she built another life. Christmas cards with Israeli stamps arrived at her father's house. Her brother in London fielded questions and declined to answer. Her own voice is absent from the record. There are no memoirs, no interviews. The silence is itself a reminder that the human cost of covert operations is not only counted in bodies and headlines, but in lives rearranged in secrecy. Seen from a distance, the assassination of the Red Prince sits at the intersection of justice, revenge, and realpolitik. To many Israelis, a necessary act. To many Palestinians, a targeted killing on already bleeding soil. And to historians, a lesson in how states project power far beyond their borders. What lingers is not just whether the operation worked in a narrow sense. Salame is gone, but the conflicts and grievances that produced him persisted long after his funeral. Wrath of God removed planners and operatives, yet new organizations and leaders emerged. The operation proved that Israel could reach a man like the Red Prince, but it did not end the cycle of violence. And then there is Erica, standing alone on a balcony in Beirut, the transmitter hot in her hand. Was she a heroine, avenging murdered athletes, a professional following orders, or a pawn moved into place by forces larger than herself? The answer depends on where the story is told and who is listening. What is certain is that her brief appearance in the open record reveals a darker truth about covert warfare. Some of the most consequential acts of state power depend not on famous generals or public speeches, but on anonymous individuals whose lives disappear into silence the moment the operation ends. For viewers looking back on that January afternoon in Beirut, The image that endures is not only the burning convoy, but the still figure on the balcony, whose choice set everything in motion. It leaves a final question hanging over the story, one no archive can fully answer. When a state decides that one person must die for the sake of its security, does that decision make the world safer? Or simply push violence further into the shadows where people like Erica Chambers are waiting with a thumb over a button?